welcome to the last lap. This week we have Frank Offred of Hull Cycle Speedway. How are we doing, Frank?
I'm doing very well, thanks, Craig.
Thanks for coming on, I appreciate it. Obviously, I became aware of you last year when you rejoined Hull Cycle Speedway. How did you find that coming back? Because I think you had a 50-year gap between the last time you rode and then 2019, 18.
Yeah, 2018. First, I think my last cycle speedway race before that was probably 1969. So I came back. It's about 49 years, isn't it? Yeah. It felt a long time. Yeah, it felt quite hard actually. The first time I got on, I was quite surprised that I could still actually remember which way around to go.
It's not that hard though. Anybody can do it, really.
Well, that's right, and it's a long story, really. I didn't do very much at all after I retired from the motor speedway, probably 10 years ago now. Time flies at my age. About 10 years ago now, I got some email from a colleague of mine at Newcastle, one Mr. Terry Kirkle, suggesting that I might like to take up the sport again, as they were opening a new track at Cromlington. So I kind of promised them I'd look into it, and I'd probably be up there the following Easter. And that was about 9 years ago. But I had another colleague who used to race with us, a chap called Robert Atkinson, Bob. Every year for about 8 or 9 years, we'd kind of Facebook message each other and say, "Are you going to do it then?" And yeah, well, maybe not next year. You know, Bob said, "I'm definitely going to do it." And I thought, well, if you were stupid enough to do it, Bob, I'm probably just as daft as you, so we'll have a go. And I said, as it happens, I said, I have a narrowboat on the canal, which is about 1.5 miles from the track at Heckmondwike. Maybe we should go there, because I said, at least I know where it is. Of course, not having a bike presented a bit of a problem. And I asked a friend of mine, I knew he had an old mountain bike, and I thought, I'll get that, strip it down, and turn it into a cycle speedway bike. One of these sort of 500-pound rally things, you know, from Alfred. So I went on Facebook again and advertised. I just said, anybody would like a mountain bike would swap me for a cycle speedway bike. I'd like to hear from you. A chap called Peter Lomas came on and he said, well, I don't really want a mountain bike. He said, but I've got a cycle speedway bike you might be interested in. He said, I'm in my 80s now, so I'm not really bothered about racing anymore. Anyway, he gave me this bike, which apparently parts belong to the legendary Brian Mustard of Carswood, who I actually raced against him. And it had the Canadian bends on, brilliant, 510 millimetres wide, just up my street. I took this bike over to Heckmondwike, but of course, being about an hour late, they were packing up ready to go. So I thought, I'll give it a shot. I'll just ride around a few times. But both tyres punctured after about a lap. And it was rather hairy after that. It was skinny all over the place. Anyway, the following weekend, I raced to meet Bob at the track, and we turned up with the bike which we christened the Green Stallion. We did half a lap, and we were both laid over the fence, gasping for breath. But amazingly, what I couldn't understand, I could still gate. And I think
you can.
I couldn't do more than a lap. Despite leading a few races, I never got past the first lap really until I ended up at the back again.
Did you notice a big difference between cycle speedway when you did it in the 60s to coming back a couple of years ago?
Oh yeah. It's quite different. Without upsetting the apple cart, I mean, when we used to race in the 60s, and I was surprised how many referees disallowed it. And I mean, this business of chopping over the front of somebody and putting them on the centre green, or riding them out to the fence while some sort of young lad disappears off down the track. I was quite disheartened by that, really, because it's not what we knew as racing in the 60s, and I certainly don't think everybody subscribes to it these days. I think there's quite a contingent of riders who would rather it didn't, and I do know several riders that despite training regularly, won't race competitively because they've got family, mortgages, good jobs, and quite frankly, they're really about getting injured.
I mean, what we try and instill in Fife is just flat out racing, and that's what beat us certainly in their first season, was that type of racing. If it was a straight race, I think we would have beaten quite a few teams.
Well, it's in the rules. I mean, the point is, it's the rule. I mean, if people, don't want that rule, get rid of the rule. Either get rid of the rule or get rid of the tactic. You can't have both. I mean, but it just seems at odds that the rules say definitely that you can't chop across somebody unless you're a bike lane clear. That you can't ride another rider to the extremes of the track. I will tell the riders that I will be enforcing them, and it's up to them what to do.
No, I agree with you wholeheartedly. How did you get into cycle speedway then?
Well, I suppose like everybody else. I mean, we're going back now to about 1963, and black and white in it, wasn't it? And you kind of convert your bike into a track bike with a better cower. Remember cowers used to play? We had a track on the team, Homewood Hawks, and the track was on the grass in front of the estate where I lived, and it was marked out by two saplings. Basically, raced around these two saplings, and the track, the corners used to get quite worn off, and many a time a race meeting we interrupted as the party came along on his moped and chased us off for ruining the grass. And we used to race on the car park at Cleveland Park and at Stockton horse racing course. That's how it started.
So Frank, you're also well known for doing motor bike speedway. How was that the progression, doing cycle speedway into the motorbikes?
Must have been 1969. And I remember going up to Berwick on a supporters club trip, and there was a guy called Dave Tilley. He also rode for Salters Gill State. I kind of persuaded him that we ought to get a real speedway bike. I mean, bear in mind, neither of us had any money. So I managed to get 50 quid, and Dave Tilley managed to get 50 quid, and we bought this old Jap. Obviously, it was a rip-off because Harry gave us 5 quid back. He said, "This one, there's a bit of luck money." Borrowed I know, I had a helmet and I had boots. And I borrowed an Harry Seacombe set of leathers, and I had a big belt round to hold them all in. They were not really meant for it. I think I was 7.5 stone at the time. More me as I am now, I suppose. And I pushed the bike up to Ron Wilson and said, "I've got a speedway, can I ever go?" And he went, "No." Took it down the following week to Middlesbrough, and lo and behold, couldn't believe it. Ron Wilson said, "Right, you can go," but he said, "Let the others go first." And after 2 laps, I was front, and I remember thinking, this is just like cycle speedway, except it's a bit faster. Mainly because I wasn't sliding on the corners; I was just going wheeling. As soon as Ron Wilson saw that, he come right up to me with the contract. He signed this, son.
Well, when I knew that you were coming on, I obviously did some Googling of you, looking in Facebook, and I think you're the only current cycle speedway person that has a Wikipedia page. Did you know that? Yeah. And then in cycle speedway, you've got your Hull teammates such as Andy Angel. I think he's 6 times British champion. Nathan Everett. So dealing with all those legends, where does Terry Kirkup fit in with all of those?
Who? Well, I mean, Terry and I go back a long, long way. And to be fair, it was Terry that encouraged me to come back to cycle speedway. I mean, I always say I've been very lucky. I've raced with Ivan Major, with Barry Briggs, with David Hemsley, 3 times world champion,
right,
and with Andy Angel, who, like you say, is many times British champion. So it's been a privilege for me to race alongside him. Lucky, I think is the word. Terry and I are a little bit different. We've got this kind of sort of love-hate relationship, really. I mean, I love him to bits. I've never forgiven him for 1968 when he brought me off.
Well, I was going to bring that up because obviously I've met you when Hull have come up to Fife, and then we hosted the Eurovets last year as well, which was amazing seeing all you guys racing and competing. But always I'm hearing this 1968 story in the background and the banter between you and Terry. So what is the story for everybody that'd be watching?
It's turned into a bit of folklore, isn't it now? It was 1968, and it was, I mean, bear in mind I'd won the Tyneside Championship in 1967, so I was a defending champion. And the 9 inches deep and 7 feet wide. And yeah, the best thing to do was avoid it, ride around it, because if you went in it, you virtually stopped dead.
Right.
I was struggling because I had a cold that week and I wasn't fit as I could have been. I was actually struggling to do 4 laps, a bit like now, I suppose. And look, for some reason, I think I got 2 or 3 races and I was on for Whitbread chaining it. All by good luck and good management. I can't remember, but there was maybe a bit of, turning sideways as well. I can't remember that, but you never know. And yeah, I think it was my 4th ride with Terry. I was a bit mad in them days. Used to use all kind of silly gears, like 28, and this kind of thing, And he was on the inside, I remember that, and he made the gate on me, and I followed him around, and I wasn't particularly worried because at the time he wasn't a big threat. And I think on the 2nd or 3rd lap, he went into the hole, and he stopped dead, and the bike went sideways across the track, taking me with it. And the 2 young kids behind, passed us and were half lap in front by the time I untangled the bike, stood on his fingers and, kicked his wheel in, and went chased after him. And that put me into a runoff for the final with Terry and Jim Graham. But as I said, I was struggling with fitness. I ended up 3rd, Terry ended up 2nd, and Jim. So it kind of got a bit of a joke that when I saw him after 50 years, he's still in the black one. It's turned into a bit of folklore, hasn't it, now? It was 1968, and it was, bear in mind, I'd won the Tyneside Championship in 1967, so I was a defending champion. I remember a bad week. It was one of the weeks, it was quite cold. It must have been late in the season, and the track was atrocious, and there was a hole on the first corner. It must be 9 inches deep and 7 feet wide. And yeah, the best thing to do was avoid it, ride around it, because if you went in it, you virtually stopped dead.
Right.
I was struggling because I had a cold that week and I wasn't fit as I could have been. I was actually struggling to do 4 laps, a bit like now, I suppose. And look, for some reason, I think I got 2 or 3 races and I was on for Whitbread chaining it. All by good luck and good management. I can't remember, but there was maybe a bit of, turning sideways as well. I can't remember that, but you never know. And yeah, I think it was my 4th ride with Terry. I was a bit mad in them days. Used to use all kind of silly gears, like 28, and this kind of thing, And he was on the inside, I remember that, and he made the gate on me, and I followed him around, and I wasn't particularly worried because at the time he wasn't a big threat. And I think on the 2nd or 3rd lap, he went into the hole, and he stopped dead, and the bike went sideways across the track, taking me with it. And the 2 young kids behind, passed us and were half lap in front by the time I untangled the bike, stood on his fingers and, kicked his wheel in, and went chased after him. And that put me into a runoff for the final with Terry and Jim Graham. But as I said, I was struggling with fitness. I ended up 3rd, Terry ended up 2nd, and Jimmy as a recovery. So it kind of got a bit of a joke that when I saw him after 50 years, it reminded him, I said, he's still in the black one.
You're not going to let him forget it.
Oh, no, I'll never let him forget it. Sheffield is but I've got to say Fife as well, because Fife is like kind of a duplicate Sheffield. The banking down the street and the banking on the corners, it's very racy. I seem to recall I had a decent meeting at Fife in the Euromets last year. So, and I always seem to do okay at Sheffield. It's one of them tracks. I think the beauty of it is that when Fife's dry and fast and racy, I can actually do 4 laps. A lot of the tracks I can't quite manage the 4 laps.
You can come up and race for us then, although it's not very dry in Scotland, to be fair.
Yeah, well, yeah. It's a dilemma. I had a big season last year. Do I race for Heckman? Do I race for Comlington? But I think because I'd raced for Hull Speedway, I always regarded the Hull as my second home.
Who's been your favourite person to race against? Obviously, Terry Kirkup wouldn't be up there. now, but
Terry is right up there. Yeah. I mean, I've seen Terry have some terrible meetings, and then except when he gets to race against me, all of a sudden he seems to find another gear. And I think the score's probably even over the last few years. He's probably duffed me as many times I've duffed him. But yeah, so Terry's got to be the favourite. But I do like racing against Dave Murphy. We got to be quite friendly. I think Dave was quite shocked at Fife last year when I actually managed to beat him, and since then we've been good friends. But I do enjoy racing against him because he's kind of the benchmark for me. He's the kind of target man, and it's just this year's been ruined completely by COVID.
yeah.
Unfortunately, Dave wasn't too well at the beginning of the season.
How have you enjoyed the Eurovet series coming back?
Oh, well, I mean, that was always the target. I mean, obviously, coming back at the age of 68 last year. So, I think in the glory days of sort of league success, like, it's a distant dream. But Eurovet presented a kind of a challenge which was achievable. And I actually raced in the final round in 2018 at Leicester. And despite only being able to manage 2.5 to 3 laps, I think I ended up in the over 60s final. Didn't do very well in it, but never mind. I actually got to it. But Eurobest was always the target for Bob and I. Regrettably, Bob passed away just before last year's Eurobest started. He and I had planned to do the whole series, so we were always going to do that. As I said, Bob had slight health issues, and he was obviously just wanting to do it just to say he'd done it. I was a little bit more ambitious, and was hoping to do quite well in it.
Well, you came second, though, didn't you? In your first season, was it?
Yeah, you know what to say about second, first loser. But never mind.
So, moving forward, then, hopefully, racing will be back to normal next year in 2021. What does the future hold for Frank Offit?
Fortunately, I'll be 70. Whilst I feel I probably could do it, I've been promising myself for the last 25 years that when Julie, my wife, retired, which is just in the process of doing now, that we would go around England's waterways on our canal boat, because we've had a canal boat for the last 16 years. It's always been on the bucket list. And whilst I'm very, very tempted to do another season, I believe I've probably got another season in me if I keep training. It would seem a bit unfair that she's retired early, so we can go cruising, and then for me to go back to racing. However, I did have a word with Terry about Eurobets, and he did say they'd look at having all the events next to a canal.
There you go. I mean, what I would say from a personal point of view, Fife's only been racing for 3 years, and Hull were our very first opponents when we made our debut. And comparing that Hull team to the team that we raced last year is night and day. And I think part of that is down to you and the kind of enthusiasm that you bring to the team and galvanising everybody and bringing others into the sport. So I think you should take quite a lot of credit for that, because I think Hull, they were probably our toughest match last year.
Well, I didn't know the whole thing. I've got to say that the credit for Hull's success last year is down to Andy Angel and Dave joining this. That was incredible.
So you've touched on it before. What would you change about the sport, about cycle speedway?
Well, I can't understand why it is less popular than it was, given that the tracks now are stadiums, the public stadiums. We used to race in mud fields, dug out of anything, and now it actually looks like kind of a professional sport. And I suppose, be critical. I believe that British cycling don't give cycle speedway the merit it deserves, and I think perhaps there's a couple of things that could be done to help it. And certainly some kind of marketing. One of the good signs on the horizon is the fact that it seems to be catching on in the USA. We all know the USA, how brilliant they are at marketing and bringing things forward. And maybe that takes off in America. The people in this country piggyback onto that and take advantage of that.
Well, hopefully they'll eventually take notice of us and the sport will thrive again.
Well, yeah, I mean, and as I alluded to before, I mean, I know 3 people that won't race because of the tactics that are employed. And there's 3 guys that would probably come back and race. But you've got to look at it from a perspective of a parent. I mean, you've got a parent of a kind of a 12 or 14-year-old comes along and sees some of the tactics going on, sees the blood and the guts and the broken, collarbone. What my child doing this? It can be pretty brutal at times.
I think that's certainly a big part of it, is the tactics.
I mean, one of the big problems, of course, is there's absolutely nothing in it for the trade.
Yeah.
If the trade can't make any money out of it, there's no support. Obviously, the trade supported DMX, the trade supported mountain bike, big style, 20 years ago, because there was money to be made. That's one of the problems with cycle speedway, is there's no money to be made on.
So, last question, Frank. How would you encourage somebody into the sport?
Talking about it, I mean, I actually work for me. Part of my training involved joining the UK group and Teesside, and that meant I was doing sort of 40, 50-mile rides regularly throughout the winter in a group. One or 2 of them took an interest in what I was doing. They asked me to do a presentation for one of their club nights about my life. And I put a lot of pictures up about cycle speedway. And 1 or 2 of them showed an interest, and I encouraged them to come along. And one of the guys did, Mark Greenship, came along and actually rode for us in the first match. But unfortunately, that was the one and only match, so he's kind of lost to it at the moment. I suppose it's about talking to people about it. I remember when I was a kid, I seemed to be quite influencer. I remember joining the Cubs, and within about 6 weeks after school, we're in the same pack. Talking about it as good a way as any. It's good marketing, it's good promotion. Am I missing out here? Could I be involved with it? But one of the things I find quite amazing these days, every track seems to have a shed full of bikes. I mean, yeah. One of the reasons for delaying my comeback, when Tenny first asked me 7 or 8 years ago, was I thought, well, I ain't got a bike. Little did I know that, the Crumlin had a shed full of bikes. Not that I'd ever get away with those skinny little handlebars they use these days.
Well, you certainly help promote the sport, and I hope you're not lost to it, and that you come back next year, even for the Eurovets. And I appreciate you coming on, Frank.
Yeah, no problem. That'd been my pleasure.
So thank you very much, and I hope to see you up at Fife soon. Right, thanks, Frank.
No problem.
See you later.